Captain Peter Cutsie, South Korea, and this is my briefing room, part 2 of All About Checklists. Non-normal checklist introduction. The non-normal checklist chapter contains checklists used by the flight crew to manage non-normal situations. The checklists are grouped in sections which match the system description in Volume 2. Enunciated checklists. Most checklists correspond to a light, alert, or other indication. In most cases, the master caution and system enunciator indicate a non-normal condition. These lights, alerts, and other indications are the cues to select the associated checklist. And remember the sequence of who calls for the checklist. Unenunciated checklists. Checklists without a light, alert, or other indication, such as ditching, are called unenunciated checklists. Most unenunciated checklists are in the associated system section. For example, fuel leak is in section 12. Fuel unenunciated checklists with no associated system are in chapter 0. Quick action index. Checklists that need a quick response are listed in the quick action index. In each system section, quick action index checklists are listed first, followed by checklists that are not in the quick action index. The titles of the quick action index are printed in bold type. I'm sharing with you the front cover of a quick action reference, I should say quick action index, on the front cover of the quick reference handbook, the QRH. So this particular front cover is the quick action index. Checklists that are uppercase, such as auto brake disarm, are enunciated by a light, alert, or other indication. Checklist titles that are in upper and lower case, such as window damage, are not enunciated. Airplane effectivity statement. If a checklist or a step in a checklist is not applicable to all airplanes, airplane effectivity information is included in the checklist. Now, for those of you who are flying with a carrier that have Boeing's OPT, Operational Performance Tool, this doesn't apply, providing you're not reading from the hard copy checklist. If you're reading strictly from the iPad or tablet, as dictated by your company SOPs, each particular airplane is covered separately. In other words, you wouldn't have effectivity is included in the checklist. On the OPT, that OPT for that airplane covers everything. All right. Airplane effectivity can be listed by airplane number, serial number, or tabulation number. A checklist is applicable to some, but not all airplanes. Airplane effectivity is centered below the checklist title. If a step in the checklist is applicable to some, but not all the airplanes, airplane effectivity is included above the step. If a checklist or step in a checklist is applicable to all airplanes, airplane effectivity is not included. Now, you'll find in today's day and age that most carriers are using Boeing's operational performance tool, that is the OPT, and this would not apply in the OPT, as the OPT looks after the effectivity for that particular airframe. Condition statement. All checklists have a condition statement. The condition statement briefly describes the situation caused or that caused the light, alert, or other indication. Unenunciated checklists also have condition statements to help in understanding the reason for the checklist. Here we have an example, cabin temperature hot. And if you notice, the condition and the objective are together, and they're highlighted in a gray background to make them stand out on the white page. We're talking about paper copies. In OPTs, everything is in one color, which you have to be careful with, incidentally. So condition, for instance, flight cabin temperature hot is the actual situation. The condition, flight deck or cabin passenger cabin temperature is excessively hot. The temperature can cause incapacitation. And the objective to regain temperature control, if unable to regain control, to descend and configure to provide an alternate ventilation. Now, that's condition. I talked about the objective. That we'll talk about later on the PowerPoint. So both of them are together under the title of the particular non-normal. Here we have the objective statement. So we just looked at it. So some checklists, not necessarily all checklists, have objective statements. Well, the one we just read had an objective statement. All right. The objective statement briefly describes the expected result of doing the checklist, or briefly describes the reason for the steps, which we saw. Memory items versus reference items. Checklists can have both memory and reference items. Memory items are immediate actions that must be done before reading the checklist. However, you must remember that when you actually call for the checklist, you still have to read everything from the top. These actions must be done from memory or from an approved, immediate, accessible reference, such as a quick reference checklist, QRC, and need to be done prior to doing the reference items. The last memory item is followed by a dashed horizontal line. Here we're looking at an example rapid depressurization. Items 1 through 5 are recall or memory items. And if you notice the dashed line, that's the end of the recall items. And you have to be careful if you're using an OPT and it's all in one color. Reference items are actions to be done while reading the checklist. So the checklist is read, then the item is done. Additional information section. Now you do have some checklists that have additional information. Some checklists have additional information at the end of the checklist. We'll show you an example in a second. The additional information provides data that the flight crew may need, or I should say wish to consider. The additional information does not need to be read. However, a personal note, make sure you do read it. And in some cases, it may be advisable to have a look at the information first. Here is an example of additional information, the cargo fire. Now, the condition fire is detected in the related cargo compartment, and the objective is to suppress the cargo fire. If you notice that the item 1 and item 2 are not memory items, or not recall items. Airmanship dictates that you may complete the reference items by memory in some situations. And we'll actually point that out and reference to in the QRH to just what I said later on in this series. So let's go to it and actually see. So this is not memory items, but we'll talk about that later. Let's go to the additional items and see. Here's the additional information, which does not need to be read, but you should know it's important that the red forward aft cargo fire warning light or lights can extinguish, remain illuminated, or re-illuminate over the remainder of the flight. If the forward or aft cargo fire warning lights re-illuminate, both master fire warning lights also re-illuminate, and the fire warning bell sounds. These flight deck indications alone of a cargo fire within the same compartment do not indicate the fire is uncontrolled. Illumination of the cargo fire discharge light indicates the fire suppression system has been fully activated. So you have to understand your airplane, and the additional information is important. And I personally feel that it should be read at the appropriate time. Non-normal checklist operation. Non-normal checklists start with steps to correct the situation. If needed, information for planning the rest of the flight is included. When special items are needed to configure the airplane for landing, items are included in the deferred items section of the checklist.
Once you're airborne and if you experience an engine malfunction, fly the airplane, track the extended center line to 400 feet. That is the red zone. Then you go into the amber zone to 800 feet. And then at 800 feet, you're in the green zone. And then at MSA, you're in the blue zone. In any case, if there is an engine out published procedure by the airport authorities and you don't have an approved company engine out procedure, you follow the airport authorities. If there is no engine out procedure published by your company, in your database or nothing mentioned for that airport, you track the extended center line of 1,500 feet. That's standard. Then you're flying the airplane. Then you navigate. Navigate means where are you going? Are you coming back to the airport, ideally over the airport to hold, or en route? So you organize the navigation portion of it, of the sequence next. Let's say we're coming back. Once you're established in the holding pattern, that's the end of the navigation portion. Then you get into communicating somewhere in there very briefly. You have to if you break the sit, but you do not call for the first checklist until established after you've navigated. And ideally, that would be in a holding pattern. You would call for your first non-normal checklist, followed by other non-normal checklists in sequence. And then the last non-normal would be the one engine inoperative landing checklist down to deferred items. That's pretty well the sequence, and you can follow that in my videos.
Now, before we continue, I talk about red zones, amber, green, and blue. That's just me in how I teach my students worldwide a good way to understand what happens at those critical points. The red zone is anything below 400 feet from over the threshold at V2 speed minimum to 400 feet above airport elevation. Critical. Nothing's done at that time except to fly the airplane. Nothing said virtually to distract the pilot flying. You can see all of this in my library, very important, and labeled the red, amber, green, and blue zones, a full understanding of how to handle an aircraft after liftoff until MSA. If you were going en route and not coming back over the airport, you would ensure that you're established en route before you get involved in a checklist. And if involved going en route, you would do everything that the checklist calls for, down to the one engine inoperative landing checklist, which you would wait until perhaps top of descent, depending on how far away your alternate was. All right, let's continue. Only a few situations need an immediate response, such as cabin altitude warning or rapid depressurization. Usually, time is available to assess the situation before corrective action is started. All actions must be coordinated under the captain's supervision and done in a deliberate, systematic manner. Follow your company SOPs. Flight path control must never be compromised. You fly the airplane first, aviate, navigate, and communicate. Do memory items. When a non-normal situation occurs, at the discretion of the pilot flying, do all memory items in their areas of responsibility without delay. Call for checklist and do initial actions. The pilot flying calls for the checklist item. When the flight path is under control, in other words, you've aviated. You may have had to turn after takeoff, depending on your airport authority engine out procedures, if there is one, your company engine out procedures, if there is one, or straight ahead to 1,500 feet if there isn't. Fly the airplane first. The airplane is not in a critical phase of flight, such as takeoff or landing. all memory items have been complete, the pilot monitoring reads aloud the checklist title, the airplane effectivity as applicable, if needed, to verify the correct checklist. As much of the condition statement as needed to verify the correct checklist is selected. You've got to be very careful of reading the correct checklist. Limit, surge, or stall checklist covers 3 different items in the same checklist. Engine fire, severe damage, or separation, 3 different items in the same checklist. So make sure you properly identify and read the correct checklist. As much of this objective statement as applicable as needed to understand the expected result during the checklist. All right. The pilot flying does not need to repeat the information, but must acknowledge that the information was heard and understood. So as the pilot monitoring is reading a statement, he waits for an acknowledgement. Check, understood, continue, I understand, or I don't understand, repeat. Very important. So that's important. This statement is important. For checklists with memory items, the pilot monitoring first verifies that each memory item has been done. The checklist is normally read aloud during verification. Follow your company SOPs. The pilot flying does not need to respond except for items that are not in agreement with the checklist. Remember, we showed you in video 1 about verify, 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 verify. Everybody, 2 people on board the flight deck, both pilots must verify the actions that have been completed or are about to be completed. The item numbers do not need to be read. All right. Do reference items. Non-memory items are called reference items. Why? Because you're reading them, referring to a hard copy or an OPT. The pilot monitoring reads aloud the reference items, including the precaution, if any, the response or action, any amplifying information. Now, the pilot flying does not need to repeat the information, but must acknowledge that the information was heard and understood. Check. I understand. Continue. Go ahead. Continue. Or I don't understand. Repeat. Whatever your company SOPs tell you. And if you don't have a company SOP that is telling you that, then listen to me. I know. I've been around for a long time. It is recommended that the flight crew read aloud all the choices in a choose one step. So many QRH items have different steps. For instance, in the smoke or fumes removal, here's an example. Number 11 is choose one. So the pilot reading the checklist, which is the pilot monitoring, would read smoke or fumes are controllable or smoke or fumes are uncontrollable. Then you would both agree which one you're going to choose. If it's uncontrollable, then you would go to step 12.